Good afternoon. Not so long ago, I was actually working in communications at an art museum, and I would have liked to have had some of these resources when I was working in those days. And I hope that you will find them useful. The Wallace Foundation does like to support arts organizations, but with the idea that we pull out lessons that would be more generalizable and interesting to the field. And in that light, we asked Barb Harlow, who is has quite a background in and as an expert in market research, not necessarily in the arts, but I think he got converted to the arts, to work alongside us and pull out what we were learning from these funded activities, what we called the Wallace Excellence Awards, and that's what you're going to hear about today. Bob is a social psychologist. He got his PhD from Princeton in social psychology. He's also a statistician, and he did postdoc work in quantitative analysis right around the corner in NYU's Stern Business School. He has held lots of positions at IBM with Yankelovich and others, and he has now his own research and consulting firm. So there's a lot more that I could say about Bob. He's been an incredibly wonderful partner with Wallace. We've been on this journey before, and I hope it continues. So please welcome Bob Harlow.
Thanks so much, Jessica. What I want to do is tell you about how organizations are using audience research to help grow their audiences, to not only attract newcomers, but get them to come again and again. And I'll also tell you about some resources, actually the resource right you have in front of you, taking out the guesswork, that is really designed to help organizations get started doing market research if you're not doing it already. The organizations that I'm going to talk about today, they found success with audiences that they had not had success with in the past. Which is a huge, huge challenge, because you think about it, most of these organizations were used to serving a certain kind of person, and you know how that person is, right? She's middle-aged, she's 50, she's in her late 50s or higher, and she, empty nester with disposable income, and they said, we need to serve different kinds of people. That's a challenge when you're used to serving one kind of an audience, and I know I don't have to tell you, anybody in this room, that. And some of the reasons why serving new audiences, attracting new audiences are so difficult is because there are so many questions. For example, we don't know what the barriers are. Why aren't they coming? What would pique their interest? How could we become relevant and get on their radar screen? In addition, some of the challenges as marketers that we have in particular are what kind of communications or other marketing would speak to them. We've gotten used to developing brochures on our website to speak to a certain kind of person, a person that probably knows us well. How do we talk to newcomers? Huge questions. And in addition, if we're lucky enough to get them to come, how do we know our programs are working? How do we know they're having a good experience? How do we know we're giving them enough to find their way into the art? All of these questions are ones that we have to answer successfully if we're going to build and maintain our audiences, new audiences. A lot of times, though, and this isn't just a thing in the arts, it's actually a thing, it's a small business thing, and most arts organizations are small businesses. We're working like this. We could do audience research and try to answer some of these questions, but instead we're sort of working on our best guesses. Sometimes those guesses are accurate, sometimes they're not. And working in this way can be challenging. It's like, and actually I can't say it as well as Magda Martinez says. She said, when you're trying to attract a new audience, and in her organization they were trying to attract newly arrived immigrants. You can imagine how hard that would be to an art school. She said it was like trying to inviting guests to dinner without first finding out what they like to eat or what food allergies they have. And they actually had some false stops and starts. They built some programs that frankly just never got off the ground. But luckily they ended up doing audience research and found a way to bring newly arrived people to their art school in downtown Philadelphia. Now, the work that I'm going to talk about today comes from, as Jessica said, the Wallace Excellence Awards. I won't go too much into detail about what they were, but just let you know that it was a really diverse set of organizations in 6 cities, different visual and performing arts organizations. They all were pretty large, though, right? All with budgets over $1 million. And they all were tasked with attracting a new audience, an audience that they hadn't attracted before. They had pretty good results, actually. Those that wanted to grow their audience in general grew it by 29%. If they were targeting a specific group, say older adults or young professionals, they had even greater results. Well, like as Jessica had mentioned, Wallace had asked me to lead a team of researchers to examine why were some of them doing well, and actually some of them didn't do well. What were the things that made the difference there? And that's what I talked about last year when I was here. We actually identified, and this is from a report called Road to Results. We identified, looking across a diverse set of organizations, 9 practices that helped organizations build their arts audiences. These worked no matter if you were visual arts, performing arts, no matter what kind of audience you were going after. You're going after wealthy people in Seattle or newly arrived immigrants in Philadelphia. These were effective practices, and they're described in detail in Road to Results. But I want to focus on one in particular because there was one that was a real game changer that was really the key that opened the door for their strategies, and that's taking out the guesswork. They weren't like that guy who was feeling his way and acting on hunches. Instead, they said, we're going to attract these new audiences. We have no idea what they want. Let's talk to them first. Let's do audience research. And the audience research helped them do 3 things. First, learn about audiences, obviously. Pinpoint the barriers that are keeping them away, and find out what attracts them. They're all going to say money, but it's not really money. You go under the surface and you figure out what that is. And they did research to figure out what that was. Also, audience research helped them improve their marketing, figure out ways to talk to folks that they hadn't been talking to before, using a language that they would resonate with. Not dumbing it down, not poking fun at the art, but just saying, all right, let's give them things that they can relate to right now to attract them to our organizations. It also helped them track progress. So once their initiatives were off the ground, so many organizations, their plans sort of went astray, but they had research on the ground, and they were monitoring their programs as they were happening. What they could do then was course correct when things weren't going well, and when things were going well, they were doubling down on those things that were really working. There are 2 kinds of research, and if you understand how we use that, you really can get an idea of why we use certain kinds of research. One is qualitative. What qualitative research is it's very open-ended. We have interviews. The results we get back aren't data. They aren't numbers. It's ideas. It's concepts. Why aren't young people coming to the symphony? Because they find it intimidating. That's a concept. That's the kind of stuff we get back. It's very open-ended, very how and why. Often our questions are how and why. What are the barriers? How can we get them to come? Why aren't they coming? That's when we want qualitative research, and very often it's focus groups. And I'll talk about those a lot today. The other kind of research that we use is quantitative. That's when we want to count things or measure things, like a poll. And I know we're all sick of polls, right? But 54% of women in Illinois are, in favor of this candidate. When you're counting things, measuring things, how many people that came to our event were newcomers? How many were 18 to 24? That's when we use surveys. So if your questions are why and how, you're going to use qualitative and probably focus groups. If you want to measure things, track things, it's how many, and that's surveys. What I want to do now is actually get to some of the fun stuff and tell you about some organizations that used audience research. And I will start with one that used it to learn about new audiences and figure out what would attract them. Now again, when you're trying to figure out what's going to attract a new audience, you have a lot of how and why questions. Why don't they visit? How can we break through the barriers? What do they think or know about us? What do they look for when they're going out? This is why focus groups are perfect for this. This is that qualitative research. We want to get those ideas. So we do focus groups. And for those of you that aren't familiar with focus groups, I know many of you are, but let me just do a quick review for those that aren't. They're moderated discussions where you actually have a discussion guide. You get a group of people, about 6 to 8 people, in a 90-minute to 2-hour discussion. And the real magic to a focus group is you get like-minded people that have stuff to share. They're demographically similar. That way they share with each other. You ever go to a party and you find how I don't mean to slam anybody here, but the young mothers congregate and all of a sudden they're talking about schools and that kind of stuff. It's that kind of sharing is what you hope to happen in a focus group. You get people that are on the same page, in the same life phase, and you get them to talk about your organization, why they're not coming, what would get them to come. We typically do 3 groups at a minimum, and we often recruit them professionally. What I mean by that is we want to talk to new audiences, so we can't just look at our ticket database or our membership rosters. So there actually are folks, they're focus group recruiters. That's what they do. And you can give them a spec. I would like young professionals, age 35 and under, blah, 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 and they will actually recruit people to come for a focus group discussion. One organization that used them wildly successfully was Pacific Northwest Ballet. I'll refer to them as PNB in Seattle. This actually is an image from their sold-out tea night, and I love to say sold-out tea night because for years, Pacific Northwest Ballet struggled with teens and young adults. They couldn't get them to come. And they were very concerned because, as many of you know, teens and young adults don't go to the ballet. And they were concerned that if they didn't get them to come in Seattle, the ballet would disappear. Because they saw their audience getting older, they saw the national data, and it really was jumping down. Let me tell you just a little bit about Pacific Northwest Ballet. This is the largest organization I'll talk about, and it is huge. Audience of 250,000 for 100 performances a year. They have a budget of $23 million, so it is a big organization. And like I said, what they were trying to do was get teens and young adults to attend ballet performances, something that's pretty tough. And they did focus groups to kind of say, what are the barriers? Why aren't they coming? How can we get them to come? And it was so interesting. This is one of those cases, like many that we worked with, where what they thought would work was absolutely so far off base, even though it made perfect sense. Because Pacific Northwest Ballet, so you know, it's a really interesting company and unusual in that they present storybook ballets, the classics, you know, the Swan Lakes, the Giselles, the Coppelias, all that stuff. They also present the most cutting-edge contemporary ballet, not only Twyla Tarp and Jerome Robbins, but also Christopher Wheeldon, William Forsythe, Ulysses Dove. And they said, okay, we totally can get these young kids. We will show them our cool and edgy side. That is how to get these young kids, right? Wrong. They did focus groups, and the kids, like the contemporary stuff, they don't know what ballet is going to happen, what's going to happen at a ballet performance. You bring out people in sweatpants beating on steel tables, which is William Forsythe's one flat thing, and that freaks them out. They're like, no way. They gravitate towards the storybook ballets, the thing that Pacific Northwest Ballet thought would be that they would find so boring. That's what they want for their first experience. They don't know what's going to happen at the ballet. Thank God. Like, okay, it's a story. I can follow it. And if it's Romeo and Juliet, I know that story. This is one of those examples, and this happened so many times, where something that made sense logically turned out not to play out. And luckily, Pacific Northwest Ballet did do that research. Let me tell you about some other things that they heard in their research. Okay, so they did focus groups with teens and young adults, 2 rounds of focus groups actually, and they heard that teens and young adults think they won't understand ballet, so they stay away. That sounds pretty obvious, but here's the thing. It's not like teens and young adults said, ballet, oh, I've seen it and I hate it. It's that they didn't know what it was. So they just didn't have exposure to it, right? You can't like what you don't know. That's what it was. It wasn't like they had any aversion to it. Also, they heard that they weren't sure they would be welcome at Pacific Northwest Ballet. And this kind of a thing, I have to say, the staff at the PNB thinks that this is not true. They pride themselves on being inclusive. And when you do research with new audiences, you often hear this stuff. You hear these perceptions because you're talking to people that don't know you. They were recruited because there were people that weren't going to the ballet, right? But you hear this stuff. So they weren't sure they were welcome. And the thing is, too, I have to say, there are many organizations that do this work. They hear these perceptions and say, they just don't get us, and walk out the door. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. What PNB did that was so smart, they said, this absolutely is not true, they don't get us, but what do we do about it? This is the reality that we're dealing with. If we want these guys to come, this is what we're working with. Let's hear more. Tell us more about what that feels like. And people said, it's a closed society. When I get there, I'll feel like I don't fit in. Really hard to hear. Imagine hearing that about your organization. Although, I love this quote. This is my favorite quote, not only of PNB, but of like my 20 years of doing focus groups. So one of the kids said, it would be like sitting with someone else's parents. Like, nothing communicates discomfort more than that. If you remember when you were a teen, like, what would that be like? Imagine sitting with someone else's parents when you're 15. It's a night you want to have. But that really, those kinds of comments, though, really helped them. That gave them a real sense of what was going on. And that's the kind of thing that a teen would only say to another teen, right? They also heard that these teens and young adults only go to performances when they know who the performer is. And even if they don't know who the performer is, if a new band is in town and somebody suggests it to them, oh, do you want to go see whatever the band is? They'll Google it and find videos or whatever, right? I see young people nodding their heads. That's what I guess they do these days. But Pacific Northwest Ballet had no online content, nothing on the dancers. You go to their website, it was clunky, and it was just basically closing the door. It said to the teens and young adults, don't need you. That's how they find things, and that website was lame. Their own words. Now, the thing that was smart, and this is where research has value, because a lot of people do research, but there's a thing about doing research strategically, and that's what Pacific Northwest Ballet did. And what I mean by that is they said, okay, these are the things that we're up against. Let's build out programs that counteract all of these things. Everything we do is, we could do a lot of things because they had a lot of Wallace money. They said, we're not just going to throw stuff at the wall. Everything we'll do will be towards, well, I'll tell you. Moving from research to the strategy, they said, okay, they think they won't get ballet. Well, we will help them get to know us. We will find ways to do that. They're not sure that they're welcome. We will go out of our way to communicate approachability. They go to performances only when they know performers, but they can't find anything out about us. Well, we are going to give them ways to see what we do every day. We will take ourselves off the pedestal and become so easy to know that it will be hard for them not to get to know us. What does that look like? So, Teen Night is just one example, and Teen Night is such a brilliant thing because remember that perception? It would be sitting with someone else's parents. What they did was they wanted to create a comfortable environment for teens to see ballet for the first time. So they had Teen Night, and what Teen Night is every year there's a choreographer showcase. It's a premiere of new works that no one's ever seen. It's world premiere, and they've always had it every year in Seattle. And they decided to say, well, you know what? Before Seattle sees it, the teens are going to see it. So it's a special night for teens, and it's communicated to them that you are the first ones to see this, which totally says we care about you. It's just one of those ways to say, you are welcome, we want you. They also had several low-cost ticket programs. This was brilliant. You know, they were hard to get to know, so what they did was they had an intern. This was not expensive to do. They had an intern walk around with a Mac, with an HD camera, and edit things on her Mac that she saw in the rehearsal studios, in the schools, in the classrooms, at auditions, just stuff that she saw. They had no idea what was going to happen. Hundreds of thousands of views. And in fact, they have professionally produced stuff. Doesn't even come near what this stuff gets. And you can see it's, no offense to the woman who made it, she's lovely and very talented, but you can see the lighting is not well done. It's just her walking around with a camera, but giving ways to see what goes on at the studio behind the scenes. They also wanted to make sure that they were communicating approachability, and they took a good look at the ads that they were producing. And these were the kinds of images that they used before, and that they often use. And this is an ad that the kind of image we often see. And if you know the ballet really well, if you've gone to the ballet, you've been going for years, this image communicates volumes. You can see the discipline. You can see that, obviously she's had years of training. She's in a perfect position. She's clearly focused, right? That's for somebody that knows the ballet and gets the ballet. But what about somebody that's never gone to the ballet before? What do they see? It's somebody in a weird pose. They look like they're in pain. And these kids, and they weren't trying to be snarky, but this is like, they don't see the same thing that a seasoned ballet goer sees, right? It's, and it seems kind of funny, but it's like, gosh, if we want to get newcomers, we can't show these images. These images create distance. And this is the marketing director talking. She said, we thought we had to show the grandeur of the art form. Oh no, new people, this gives a newcomer nothing to relate to. So let's give them something to relate to. One thing is an expression that somebody can hook into, like showing the emotion of the character. The woman on the right, this is the new kind of image that they use, she's looking at you. She's creating immediacy and excitement. And this is not a perfect pose, but what it is, you now see the ads that they use are the folks in character. Romeo and Juliet are not dancing anymore, they are embracing. That's how that works. They also, and I could go on and on about these guys, I'll just say one more thing that they did, which is just so smart. Helping people, wanting to make sure that teens could get to know them easily, they cozied up to these teen bloggers. And these are bloggers on a website called Teen Tix, which is a ticket access program in Seattle. It's the largest teen art site in Seattle. It gets thousands and thousands of readers. And they got to know those bloggers really well, set up workshops for them to help them learn how to write critiques of ballet. And sure enough, they posted these things that other teens see. Teens are looking for things to go, what they want to do to go out. They go to the Teen Tix website, and this is the stuff they see. Very much like if you go to Amazon and you want to buy a lawnmower, you look and see, well, what should I buy? What do people like me think? Here's the same exact thing. These are reviews from people that went to see it. You can't buy this kind of publicity. And again, what is so brilliant about the strategy and so disciplined is that everything that PNB did was really based around those barriers that they heard about in focus groups that they knew they had to attack. So I guess it's not surprising that their results were pretty incredible. In this period of a few years, they more than doubled the number of teens that were going to Pacific Northwest Ballet performances. And on top of these ticket sales, the number of performances that were tickets sold to those that were 20 to 25 went up 20%. Sustained participation, people going to one or more than one performance per season, went up 55%. All these numbers are especially amazing if you compare them to that survey of participation in the arts the NEA does during the same time period. Attendance by 18 to 24-year-olds was down another 4%. So PNB really is obviously bucking trends. No doubt about it, thanks to the research. These actually are, this is data from the Clay Studio in Philadelphia. This is their student and enrollment data, which over a period of just a few years, they doubled their revenue and tripled the enrollees, and largely by getting a new audience of young professionals, an audience they had no idea how to serve. Now, it's not just research that got them to do this. They have a really creative staff that came up with some clever programs. And the case study, like all the others, is on the Wallace website if you want to read it. But let me tell you what the role that research played. First, a bit about the Clay Studio. It's a large organization, $1.7 million in Philadelphia. They have a lot of programs. They have workshops, classes, exhibition, a shop, gallery, and workspace. And they saw, like many ceramic arts, this is an internationally known art studio, by the way. They have internationally known exhibitions and recognized exhibitions. And they saw their audience getting older. They didn't see any new people, and they were very concerned about that, obviously, thinking that if this keeps up, there will be no Clay Studio. So they said, let's bring in some of the young professionals that we see in Philadelphia. Center City's full of them. And they actually started out, they did that thing in the beginning where they just made some guesses about what might work. Hey, you know what'll work? Let's have some really sexy gallery events where an artist talks about the work and there's wine. Sounds great. Nobody came. Totally bombed. And they did other things too where it was like mixing pottery and booze, and like people would drink but then they would leave. And they made no connection to the studio. So then what they did is they said, all right, let's look at some of the research. And this is stuff, and I love how they did this, because this is stuff, even if you have no research budget, you can do this. Because they said, look, we have a problem getting in young people, so do arts organizations around the country. So maybe there's something in the air. Let's look at what other organizations are doing. Let's look at other trends. And there were two things that they really hit on. And now this was in like 2008, right? So this is when a lot of that literature was coming out, like that book, Engaging Art, that was talking about how young adults might be more enticed by active participation. They didn't just want to look at objects, but they wanted to like take part in the museum and those kinds of things. You probably know like the Participatory Museum and those kinds of things, so much more active. They also looked in the performing arts, and they said, you know what, across the performing arts, in theaters, in orchestras, in symphonies, in the opera, audiences are less inclined to commit. They're not doing the subscription anymore. So these were two things, and they really started to look at this, and they said, okay, what if we put these together? If we put these together, moving from research to strategy, we have to come up with something that's low commitment, social, and participatory. And we're running out of time because we've done a lot of events and they're just not working. But they put these together and they came up with what they called date night. And it's all these things, low commitment, social, participatory. What it is, it was marketed as a relaxed evening where a trained potter will walk you through 3 hours. It's a 3-hour commitment, that's it. A trained potter will walk you through a small project from start to finish, even if you've never worked with clay before. Working on the wheel, glazing, firing, coloring, the whole thing. And this event, it started out small. They were doing it every other month. It soon began to sell out weeks in advance. Just because they really put together those different dots, they came up on a winner, and it was selling out weeks in advance. They were offering it twice a month. They couldn't believe it. They were so then sold on research, they said, you know what, let's see if we can actually even build on this success. We're getting young people that we've never gotten before. Can we build on that? Can we find ways to even deepen their engagement with us? Can we find ways to talk to them in a way that will actually get more of them to come to the Clay Studio? How are they learning about us? What will get them to come again? Those how and why questions, they again turned to focus groups, and they did it specifically to shape their marketing. They said, let's see if we can change the kinds of marketing that we have that might appeal to young people in a different way. Tell them about these new programs that we have in a way that's going to appeal to them. If you do this, there are a couple great things, a couple tips just to know. Often what we do is we share our marketing materials and get their reactions. Not just say, hey, take a look at this, will you read it? But see if they even go for it in the first place. Like, lay a bunch of ads on the table. What do they gravitate towards? Oh, I like the colors of the pictures. Or I like wow, this one has like people moving around. What are the things that they gravitate toward? Share other materials from other organizations. It doesn't have to be your own. The feedback can also be pretty surprising. Again, we're talking to people. This material wasn't designed for them. Your marketing is probably designed for a more seasoned audience. So you get newcomers and they kind of say things that sort of shock you. But you listen to them and you can really make some headway. So what did they learn in their focus groups? First, one thing that they learned was that the Clay Studio actually made it hard to participate. Clay Studios, I mentioned they had date night, but the only other thing they had their classes were 10 weeks and $300. which they thought, look, 10 weeks, $300 with a working Potter, that's a great deal. It's a great deal if you like clay, but if you've never seen clay before, you're not going to make that commitment, right? Like 10 weeks, like who's going to make 10 weeks, So they said, all right, try cutting things up. Make shorter classes, 1 day, 5 weeks, a weekend workshop. And they started to do that. They also heard specifically about their marketing. In the Clay Studio, well, they used to have a class brochure, and they were so proud of it because it was an internationally known institution, thick brochure. Look at all the stuff we're doing. That's great for them, but not for a newcomer. Newcomers looked at it and they said, I have no idea even where to start. They were like, it was like classroom stuff, a letter from board events, board updates, a baby, like letter from the president. Like a newcomer's like, what are they going to do with that, right? But you don't know that until you actually show it to somebody. I mean, I would never have thought that. I can sit here and say it all snide now, but like I saw the focus group report, right? So they heard, keep the message simple. The class brochure is too overwhelming. Newcomers, they're not even going to pick it up. They don't. It's not going to attract their attention. There's no way in for them. So use targeted communications. Also make it sound inviting to them. The brochures and the materials were filled with terms like slips, which is some kind of coloring technique, and wheel throwing, which, I mean, it not only does it confuse novices, but it sends the message that these programs aren't for you. If you don't know what, it's like you hear those ads for like classical music and they mention all these things, you're like, I'm sorry, I don't know much about classical music, so it's just like, clearly it's not for me because I don't know why this would be a sensation at the Bavarian Opera Hall. I don't know, so clearly that's for another crowd. So they dropped the jargon. The other thing they did, which was brilliant, was, you remember that young adults, they love social, participatory stuff? Well, the images that Clay was featuring in its brochures was all images of the beautiful objects, and the Clay Studio staff loved it. Look how beautiful that is. It's so great. Well, the young adults, the young professionals, rather, didn't know what to make of it. This is their brochure on the left. That was their brochure in 2008. And if you're in ceramics, you can see, wow, look, they made ceramics look like I don't even know what that's supposed to be. And if somebody that doesn't know ceramics is not going to make the connection of what's going on at the Clay Studio. What is in there for them? But the one on the right shows people actually working with clay. That's something you can really relate to. And they moved from showing objects to showing what you could do at the Clay Studio. This was a huge shift for them. I love this quote from the president of the Clay Studio at the time, Amy Sarner-Williams. She is not a marketer. They did not know marketing, but this really summarizes what the changes they were making. She says, we had this tagline, shaping the future of ceramics. It was on all their communications. That was great, but that was for us. Not for this audience. That was a real eye-opener. People would say to us in focus groups, why would I look at this? What would make me want to come? I've got to look at something right away and see that there's something for me. It's pretty amazing, actually. Amy Sarner-Williams is not a marketer. She's been with the institution, she's been with it for years. I'm actually really stunned at the courage they had to make the changes that they made. They made a ton. And it's a good thing that they did because their results just speak for themselves. I mean, they saw once they started to do these things and listen to what the new audiences wanted, they started to see their enrollment numbers grow up. I should say that their 10-week classes also went up. So it wasn't like this was coming at the expense of their 10-week classes. Now, these numbers look really impressive, but I just happened to call the president of the Clay Studio, Chris Taylor, 2 weeks ago, and I said, so what's happening now? And he said, actually, now our tuition has gone from $300,000, it's now around $400,000, and our student enrollment is now 4,376. So these numbers just continue to grow. And all of this just unlocked by insights from research. They never would have gotten there had they not figured out how to attract these people and how to talk to them. These numbers, though, they only tell part of the story, because I look at these numbers and I'm like, okay, 2,280 people, well, who are they? What kind of experience are they having? Another great thing about audience research, another great purpose of it, is that you can use surveys to kind of tell you the kinds of experiences that people are having. And remember, quantitative research is to count things. How many people are coming, of course. And of them, you can ask questions like, well, who's coming? What percent are newcomers? What percent are 18 to 24? What are they doing while they're here? You can get a real good picture of their experience. How are they hearing about us? What's their experience like, and are they going to return? All you can do with an audience survey. And I want to give you just one quick example. I don't want to talk too much about what they did, but I want to tell you how they measured what they did in a really smart way. Using surveys to say, are we on track? The organization, I actually talked about this organization last year. It's the San Francisco Girls Chorus. I'm sure you don't remember what I said, but I'm only going to gloss over their programs. But the Girls Chorus is, it's considered the leading girls chorus in the world by many. Founded in 1978. This is, they perform to an audience of about 5,000 annually. Their budget's $2 million. This is an organization that had a particular challenge, and that is they were internationally known. They actually have won, in recent years, they've won 5 classical music Grammys. They performed around the world, including for President Obama at his inauguration, his first inauguration. I guess they only have one inauguration. His inauguration. And they have won awards for their adventurous programming by ASCAP. The problem was, though, is that in their own backyard, they were unknown, which was like this is a horrible thing. Like, they were like San Francisco's best-kept secret, which no marketer ever wants to hear. That's the best-kept secret, because obviously you're not doing your job. But something was going on. And what was happening was, even though they were internationally known, the only people going to the chorus was largely made up of friends and family of the chorus members. Classical music patrons, the kind of folks that go see chamber music performances, or the symphony, or the opera, weren't going. Now, the girls' chorus never thought they were getting an audience as large as the symphony. I mean, come on. But they did say, why aren't more people who are in it just for the music coming? We've won 5 classical music Grammys. What is going on here? And so they did some focus groups, and I'm not going to go into detail, but they did find a couple things. One, they found that they talked to classical music patrons, people that were going to the opera but not the girls' chorus and had no relation to the chorus. You talk to them and you say girls' chorus, they think Glee Club. And the Glee Clubs are fine, but they don't want to spend their Friday nights in a church basement listening to Disney while people are doing jazz hands. And that's what they thought the girls' chorus was. No offense, but that's just not their thing. They love Glee Clubs, but not for them. And what they found, though, was that the girls' chorus, not only was the name a lot of baggage, but the girls' chorus's own marketing was reinforcing these perceptions. This image was on their website. And when they showed it to classical music patrons and the focus groups, they said, is this a Girl Scout troop? Is this an after-school troop? This looks very amateurish. And that's exactly what it looks like. And all their marketing had these kinds of images of the girls in groups smiling like, no offense, the Girl Scouts is a wonderful organization, but it's not what classical music patrons want to spend $30 going to see. They did find the classical music patrons really warmed up to different kinds of images, like these, smaller group formations, showing the girls performing, and they said, that's something that I want to go see. So the girls' chorus made a bunch of changes, including changing their marketing. They also changed the front of house experience, a couple things, and they found that they were actually able to grow the number of classical music patrons in the audience. Slowly, but they were doing it. What they did is they did some surveys, and they figured out how many people in the audience were only there for the music. And I have to say, I love this example because this is their audience survey. This. And you can't see it. This is their audience survey. And I have to tell you, I actually taught graduate statistics here. I have a postdoc in statistics from Stern. I turn my nose up on data, on complicated data every day. This I embrace and I love it. And the reason that I love it is the Girls Chorus is a small organization. They cannot do a big survey. They know what they can do. They say, you know what, we can put this in the programs. We can have our ushers make announcements before the performance and during the intermission and collect them. They got a 35% response rate on this little thing, and they were able to enter the data themselves. And it's 6 very cleverly crafted questions. It's on page 69 in taking out the guesswork, and also one of the color figures before page 65. And it's really tailor-made to their particular audience questions. Really, really clever. Taking out the guesswork is a guide to using audience research, and it's really designed to help you do the things that you heard about today, if you haven't been doing them before. If you are doing them, how to do them even better. And it's really designed around 3 basic chapters here. There are case studies like the ones I just shared with you, and guidelines for how to do research to learn about audiences, how to do it to create effective promotional materials, and how to track your results. And what we did is we actually tapped the learning from 10 of the organizations that Wallace had been learning with, and it's all in there. And you know what? We included their mistakes so you don't make them, tips and pointers, all that kind of stuff. It's a really diverse group of organizations. And we include case studies that actually take you through, in detail, the questions they had, the research that they came up with to test it, what results they got, and the actions they took based on that. And it's actually designed, if you look in the table of contents, it's all designed around common questions, the kinds of questions that you may have. So if you have these questions, go look and see what other organizations did. How did they solve it? It can help get you started. These are questions that every kind of organization had. There were some wonderful examples of research that were used that were very sort of specific to certain situations. In taking out the guesswork, we focus on ones that would be broadly applicable to a broad range of folks. Each chapter also includes guidelines for how to conduct the research. So you will see step by step. If I want to do research to learn about audiences, to create effective promotional materials, track and assess results, step by step, it is there. Also, this is wonderful. We have a technical appendix in the back. All the surveys, this thing, but also, several larger surveys, focus group guides, interview guides, everything is in there as starters. If you want to take a look and get an idea and some inspiration, help you demystify the process, even use it as a starting point. In addition, those organizations all, they made a lot of mistakes, like I said. They developed some best practices. We've got the tips and pointers in there for you. They've already done the learning. You can go ahead and take advantage of it. The things that are now their best practices are in your hands. I also want to say, too, I would love to sit here as a market researcher and say that so much of doing market research it's all about getting the right survey and asking those questions in the right way and designing it. So much of effectively using market research is about the social aspect of it. How do you get folks in your organization on your side? How do you get the artistic people involved so that they don't feel threatened? And that they embrace the work. For example, Pacific Northwest Ballet again, this is their artistic director, Peter Bohl. One of the reasons why their research was so successful was because Peter Bohl himself went to the focus groups. And when he heard people say those unflattering things about Pacific Northwest Ballet, that it was unwelcoming, that it would be elitist, he really took it to heart. And I've heard him talk. He didn't know I was in the audience. And this is what he said. He's like, young people, he's like, so passionate. He's like, they want to feel welcome. And actually now, there is a section for 25 and under at Pacific Northwest Ballet. Every performance, every single one, he goes up there and he welcomes them and says, I'm Peter Bohl. And he dresses like this, so it's fine. I'm Peter Bohl. If you have any questions, just let me know. I'd love to hear more about you. That's really what gets, when you start to do things like that, when you get the whole organization involved, that's when research really becomes powerful, because everyone gets involved in tackling those barriers. And taking out the guesswork has some pointers about how to do that and some examples about how that was done well. Let me just end by saying thank you so much for your attention. Also, everything that I've talked about today is available on the Wallace website. All the case studies, for every organization I've talked about, the Girls Chorus, Clay Studio, Pacific Northwest Ballet, and so many more. There are full case studies that go into detail about them. There's also this guidebook, of course, but you don't need it because you have it in your hands. All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention. Really appreciate it.